Welcome to Faith Channel, nurturing, learning, and healing.
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be, but we want to welcome you to your faith journeys. So let's get started. I want to welcome you to this episode, and I'm your host, Curtis Watkins. And today we have a deeply moving episode lined up for you. We're honored to have Julie G with us, who bravely navigated the complex journey of reconciling her relationship with her father before he passed. Julie, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Recently, I spoke to your uncle and he shared some insights about your incredible journey of forgiveness. It resonated with me because, as I mentioned to you, that I had a similar process with my father, and it wasn't until I was 35 that I reconciled with him. Can you take us back to the beginning of your journey? What prompted you to seek that reconciliation with your father?
Well, honestly, my dad and I had a back and forth relationship for several years. I was 17 when my parents got divorced, and he kind of took the divorce out on me, I guess you could say. He had a hard time with figuring out life after my mom had left. He struggled with abuse himself, and then I think he turned that into abuse on his family. Um, and so when my mom wasn't there, I became the person that he would attack, not physically, just a lot of emotion, emotionally. Um, so when I was in my early 20s, him and I had gone back and forth, kind of having a relationship, not having a relationship. And it wasn't until I got married when I was 27 that things really came to a head. Um, I was getting married and he was going to have to be in the same room with my mother. And there was a lot of emotions in that because they hadn't seen each other or been near each other since the divorce. Um, so at that point, our ties were severed because he didn't go to my wedding. He just had an explosive situation where he couldn't go. And at that point, we didn't speak for um, probably 2 years. And then my husband was working at a hospital that my dad, who was a truck driver, he made a delivery to that hospital and he saw my husband. And my husband, being the man that he is, because he's bold, he went right up to my dad and shook his hand and said, "You need to call your daughter. I think you guys need to work things out." Um, and so my husband called me and said, "You'll never guess who I just ran into." And he told me what happened. And my heart just, I don't know, I was very nervous. And I said, "Well, what did he say? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, he said he'd call you. So we'll see if he does." So he ended up calling me and we rekindled. And I had a baby at that point, and he had heard through the grapevine that we had a daughter. And so
His grandchild.
his grandchild, yeah, and never met her. So we had to plan a get together, and he met my kids. Because at that point, I think that's when I had my second one that we rekindled. Few years went by, everything was going well. I mean, it wasn't great because every time we got together, he would still bring up a lot of the past. He loved to talk about the past. He loved to talk about, and it was one of those. It took me a while to realize how broken he was. We had a family get together, and it was my niece's birthday party. So it was a 1-year-old birthday party with my whole family, and it just a subject got brought up, and it was not good. And yeah, we severed ties again. And so it wasn't until that was 5, 6 years. that we didn't speak. And the whole time I kept thinking, I wanted to rekindle, I wanted that relationship. But now I had my children, and I felt like I needed to protect my kids because I didn't want him to keep coming in and out of our lives and behave the way he was behaving. The same way I was raised, I didn't want my kids to see that. I try to protect my kids from that. My husband and I don't have that kind of relationship. We have a very loving family, and my husband is from an abusive family himself. So we both are really like trying hard to have a harmonious home. And so bringing my dad into the picture with my kids, I did put up walls that I had never put up before. So it made it easier because my mama bear instinct, kicked in. So, but I did in the back of my head was thinking one day I might get a phone call that he's no longer with us. Something's happened to him, or what if he does want to rekindle, or maybe I further down the road I want to rekindle and then he rejects me. All those things going in your mind. And I have to say, it was actually him a year ago, a little over a year ago, that called me. I didn't know if I wanted to open the door.
Mm. Again.
Again, this would be like the third time, fourth time. And I was like, I don't know. And my husband was like, what if something's happened? He was thinking completely different than I was thinking. And I said, okay. So I picked up the phone and it was my dad. It wasn't his wife. And I just heard his voice and it just, I don't know, this big emotion came over me. And he just said that he had just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and that he realized throughout his life how many doors were shut on him, and that he realized that he's the one that's standing there with none of his family and barely any friends. And I think he had this realization that maybe his behavior had caused everyone to not really want to be around him anymore. And it was an amazing 2-hour conversation. He told me things that I had needed to hear my whole life. And he took complete ownership of things on his end. And, and I immediately went into forgiveness mode, but I still had this weird protection of myself. Like, is this real? Is he really changing? I don't know. I, honest to God, do not think he would have been able to see this perspective if this didn't happen to him. And I hated knowing that he had to go through this awful cancer and that he was in pain. And you never want to see anybody suffer. I work in a hospital. I see people suffering all the time, but now it's different with my own flesh and blood. But I don't think that we could have ever had this deep reconnection without this awful disease in the background. And that's terrible that, us humans have to be that way, but that's just how it goes.
Yeah, sad but true. And, I can relate to that. And it's often during these vulnerable moments that we find strength and clarity. And it sounds like this was one of those moments.
And the whole time I've always thought, my dad's the hardest working man I've ever met. And there's so many good qualities about him that maybe I was always not looking at either, because I was afraid of him in a way, and I was on the defense with him a lot. So through this and through his sickness and all of our talks, he lives in another state, so we weren't able to really spend a lot of time physically together in that last year. He called me right before Christmas, and he died Christmas Eve the following year. And he'd call me once a week on my way home from work. The first few conversations were, of course, a lot of baggage. But I'm telling you, by probably the third conversation that I had with him, I knew he was a changed man. And it took my sister some time to come around, because she was like, oh, now because he thinks he's changed because he's facing death, now we all have to just forgive. And I understood what she was saying, but I had to dive deep into scripture too about it, because all along my whole life, whether it was family or friends, I didn't really know my relationship with my father, just knew that I had a strained relationship. They would say, my friends and family that are religious, if you want to call it religious, have a relationship with God
Yes.
or Jesus. They would say, that you need to make up with your dad, and just to honor your parents, honor thy mother and thy father, and all of that. And so that had like a guilt in me, because I didn't understand that. And I've read that scripture, those several scriptures about that over and over again, and I'm like, how do you honor someone that is not treating you really well, and who is,
Ooh, that's a hard pill to swallow right
it
there.
is. It really is, because it's like, this is what's God telling me to do. But I think that from time I realized I can still honor him. I I was always a good kid. So I feel like I did honor him by trying to be the best version of both my parents. And it didn't mean that I had to have a relationship necessarily with him.
Just being transparent at this point because, like I said, I have had a similar process. When I was 14, my dad denied that he was my father. And from 14 to 35, Julie, I I just wanted to cuss him up one side to the other side because I felt that hurt. There was so much pain that
Yes.
I had to deal with. And it wasn't until God really relieved me of that pain and said, Curtis, you need to see or find out who that person in the mirror that you looked at that you really don't know. And I reestablished a relationship with him, which was a different type of relationship. And it gave me an understanding about some things about that I had faced in my life. But I thank God for changing my heart from a hurt heart to a heart that wanted to reconcile like you did with your dad.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that trying not to think too much about the whole honor thy mother, thy father, I started diving more into the forgiveness of things, especially when we rekindled this last time. Um, I did a lot of research on my apps and stuff, about my Bible apps, trying to find all the scriptures about forgiveness. And my mother was a big, big, big help in that regard, because she was very jaded by their relationship, and she was the one that got the brunt of his issues
Mhm.
until she left. And so my dad had written a email to me and said, I want you to give this to your mom. And so I was like, okay. So I read the email before I gave it to her, and he laid it all out of how he felt so bad for the way he treated her and mistreated her all those years, and that he hoped that she forgave him. And my mom wrote the most beautiful letter back to him. And I wasn't expecting that, but she really just said that she forgave him, and that she wished him all the best, and that she just hopes that he knew Jesus, because my mom works at a cancer institute. So I mean,
Oh,
we kind of
that's so
she knows all of the ins and outs of all that. So it was just it was interesting. It was a beautiful last year. I'm looking back now, and it's sad that he's gone, but what a gift that he gave me, because I wouldn't have reached out. I wouldn't have even known he was sick. And I really didn't have any intentions at the time of reaching out to him, because I didn't I didn't know what I was going to get, and I was still kind of blocked off. Like, I was keeping my boundaries up. And so I'm thankful that he swallowed his pride, and he made the phone call. And I'm glad my husband made me pick up the phone.
nice. Let me ask you one last question before we close out. If someone is struggling with what you had to go through in reconciling with your father and just, establishing I'm gonna say a new relationship, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think that we have to forgive as Christ forgives us. We all fall very short of um, what we need to be and what we need to do. So be patient. Um, I think that there's no need to rush into trying to reestablish and be like this perfect relationship. It doesn't have to be. It can be slow and it can be just little bits here and there and work your way up into something. I felt like with my dad, because of his diagnosis, we didn't have a lot of time, but I also feel like that because of his diagnosis, he was able to say the things that I needed him to say, and he was much more open because he was in the position he was in. So that helped. But I would say that if he wasn't sick and he had called me and we wanted to start working on our relationship, that I would just be patient. And as long as both people are willing to work on it, I do think that it's hard when only one person really wants to work on the relationship. If I were to call him and he didn't want to work on the relationship, how do you how do you really continue that relationship? So yeah, I don't know, just be patient.
Wise words, Julie. Wise words. Um, your story of enlightenment and forgiveness should resonate deeply with our audience. I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. It takes courage to open up about such a personal experience. And I believe your story will inspire many, many people, because it's not just you and I going through it. It's a lot of people in this world's going through
Yeah. It's
similar
more probably that go through this than not,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah,
Yeah. A father's relationship is very complex at times.
yes, it is. And I want to thank our viewers who tuned in to this heartfelt episode of Your Faith Journeys. So remember that healing and forgiveness are possible. On our website, which is yourfaithjourneys.com, we have a lot of free resources at yourfaithjourneys.com. And with that being said, until next time, take care and God bless you.
We'd like to express our gratitude to our sponsors and donors for supporting the Faith Journey podcast. Thank you for tuning in. May you be blessed and continue to smile. Until we meet again.